My brother never missed a chance to insult people he thought were beneath him, until one day he insulted the wrong person and got his life manhandled. My brother Brett has been carrying around an invisible ranking system since the day he learned to read, and it controls every word that comes out of his mouth. If a waiter got our order slightly wrong, Brett would loudly suggest that some people aren't cut out for customer-facing work. If a relative showed up to a family event in a car Brett did not approve of, the car would get its own segment of his dinner conversation. If a stranger at a party mentioned a profession Brett considered lower tier, he would put on the kind face he reserved for people he was about to talk down to and ask whether they had considered something more ambitious. The version of Brett the family put up with was a man with strong opinions and high standards. The version that actually existed was a 34-year-old commercial real estate broker who got most of his self-esteem from making other people feel small in rooms they thought were safe. It started in high school. Brett had a habit of asking his classmates' parents what they did for a living and then visibly losing interest mid-sentence depending on the answer. By college, he had escalated to publicly evaluating his roommate's family income out loud during move-in weekend. The roommate's mother cried in the hallway, and Brett told my parents she had an issue with feedback. After college, the targets got smaller and more vulnerable. He once made our 70-year-old cleaning lady, Polina, who had worked for our family for 20 years, recite back instructions in front of him to make sure she had understood. She quit the next week. When I tried to talk to him about it, he told me it was not his fault she got emotional. People don't know how to be challenged anymore. The worst part came when my aunt cornered me at Thanksgiving, the year Nate and I got engaged. Brett is just particular, she told me. He has high expectations because he has high standards. You take everything he says personally. Brett had told my fiancé Nate in front of my entire extended family that night that he was punching above his weight. Nate had smiled politely. We left early. The thing that finally broke me happened in May. Nate had been laid off in March and had been spending 6 days a week sending out applications. At my mother's birthday dinner that night, Brett asked Nate across the table how the extended sabbatical was going and whether I was enjoying being the breadwinner. My father chuckled the way he always did when Brett was being Brett. My mother told Nate not to take it the wrong way, that Brett was just teasing. Nate set his fork down, said the right things to my mother, and did not eat anything else for the rest of the dinner. He did not say a single word in the car on the way home. He told me a week later that he was not coming to any more family events that included my brother. That night, I decided Brett was finally going to meet someone he could not insult his way past. I work at a small private wealth firm that manages money for a handful of very large families, and one of our oldest clients is a man named Lloyd Hartley. Lloyd is the kind of tycoon who is famous in 3 industries and unrecognized in the room he is standing in. He drives a 15-year-old wagon, wears the same brown jacket to almost every client meeting, and once let a hostess seat him in the back of his own steakhouse because he did not feel like correcting her. I knew 2 things about Lloyd that mattered. His family office had been quietly evaluating a midtown property portfolio that Brett's firm was the broker of record on, and Brett had been bragging at Sunday dinners for months about closing the biggest commercial deal of his career. Our firm was hosting a small client appreciation evening that summer, and Lloyd, as a courtesy, always showed up. I invited Brett. I told him we were having a few clients and family at a private dinner at the firm's offices, that I was being considered for a senior associate role, and that it would mean a lot if he came and looked impressive for the partners. Brett was thrilled to be invited to something he could measure himself against. The night of the dinner, Brett walked into the lobby, scanned the guests, and locked eyes with Lloyd at the bar. Lloyd was in his brown jacket, eating pretzels out of a small bowl. Brett walked over to me and said, loud enough for Lloyd to hear, "Tell me you didn't let some guy off the street wander into your work event. He looks like he's here for the leftovers." Lloyd glanced at Brett, said nothing, and went back to his pretzels. I asked Brett to lower his voice. He told me I had always been too soft on these people. 2 days later, Brett's firm received a call from Lloyd's family office asking to be removed from the buyer pool on the Midtown portfolio. By the following Monday, 3 other listings Brett had been quietly working were pulled from his desk by owners who all did business with Lloyd in one way or another. Brett didn't even realize what was happening yet. Over the next 2 weeks, I sat at my desk and watched it all happen in slow motion. A colleague who handled some of the communication with Lloyd's family office told me the truth over coffee one morning. Lloyd never made a single phone call about Brett, not one. All Lloyd did was decline the deal. When the other property owners asked Lloyd's office why they had pulled out, they got 1 sentence back. "We had concerns about the professionalism of the brokerage." That was the whole thing. 1 sentence. No names, no drama, no campaign. Just a quiet, clean statement from a family office that carried more weight than anything Brett had ever said at a dinner table. The owners did their own math after that. If Lloyd Hartley did not want to do business with that brokerage, they did not want to either. Brett's firm pulled him off lead broker on 2 more accounts that same week, not because anyone told them to, but as a precaution. They did not want the stains spreading. Brett called me on a Tuesday night. I was sitting on the couch with the TV on low when his name came up on my phone. He was not panicking. Not yet, but I could hear it in his voice. That little crack underneath the confidence he was trying to hold together. "Something weird is going on with my listings," he said. "Have you heard anything at your firm about a guy named Hartley pulling out of deals?" I sat there for a second, my chest tight, and said I hadn't heard anything specific. Brett did what Brett always does. He filled the silence with his own explanation. "Probably just some old man having a bad quarter," he said. "These people come and go." He laughed, but the laugh was a little too quick. I told him I was sure it would work out and hung up. I sat there on the couch for a long time after that. The guilt hit me, but it was not the kind I expected. I did not feel guilty for what I had done. I felt guilty for how easy it was. I had barely lifted a finger. I opened a door, Brett walked through it, and the whole thing fell into place like dominoes I had set up and watched tip over one by one. That was the part that sat wrong with me. Not the act itself, but how little effort it took to dismantle something my brother had spent years building. 1 invitation. That was all it took. Nate noticed I was off that night. We were eating dinner and I was pushing food around my plate, not really there. He put his fork down and said, "What's going on with you? You've been weird for days." I looked at him across the counter and made a decision. I told him the truth, all of it. How I invited Brett knowing Lloyd would be there. How I knew Brett would not be able to stop himself from saying something about the way Lloyd looked. How I knew Lloyd's family office was connected to the Midtown portfolio. How I stood there and let it happen and watched Brett walk right up to the most powerful man in the room and call him a guy off the street. Nate listened to every word without interrupting. When I was done, he picked up his glass, took a slow sip, and looked at me. "I'm not going to tell you it was wrong," he said. His voice was calm, not cold, but careful. "But I need you to be honest with me about one thing. Did you do this for me, or did you do this for you?" I opened my mouth to answer, and nothing came out. Nate watched me sit there and nodded slowly. "That's what I thought," he said. "Just make sure you know who you're becoming." He cleared his plate and went to the other room. He was not angry. That was the thing. He was not angry at all. He was something worse. He was worried about me. I sat alone with that for the rest of the night. I I spent the rest of that week replaying his question. I kept telling myself it was about protecting people. It was about Polina standing on our porch after 20 years with tears running down her face. It was about Nate setting his fork down at my mother's birthday dinner and going silent for the rest of the night. It was about every single person Brett had ever ranked and dismissed. But there was another part of it I did not want to look at too closely. There was a part of me that enjoyed watching Brett scramble. There was a part of me that felt a small rush every time I heard about another listing disappearing from his desk. I sat with that feeling and I turned it over, and I did not like what it said about me. I did not like the idea that maybe I was not as different from Brett as I always told myself I was. Sunday dinner came around and I drove to my parents' house with a knot in my chest. Brett was already there and I could tell within 30 seconds that he was compensating. He was louder than usual. His laugh was bigger. He spent the first 10 minutes talking about some new opportunity he was chasing, some deal that was going to be even bigger than the Midtown thing. He looked right at me at one point and said, "Real brokers don't get rattled by one lost deal. That's the difference between people who play the game and people who watch from the sidelines." Channing laughed the way he always laughed when Brett said something like that, this short chuckle that told Brett he was being clever. Carolyn reached over and patted Brett's arm. "You always land on your feet," she said, smiling at him like he was 10 years old and had just brought home a good report card. I did not say a word. I sat there and watched my brother perform confidence for a table full of people who had always been his audience. And sitting there, something clicked for me that I had never let myself fully think before. This family built Brett. Every chuckle from Channing, every pat on the arm from Carolyn, every excuse from my aunt, every time someone at this table called it just Brett being Brett, they were laying another brick in the wall that made him who he is. Brett was not some accident. He was a product. And the people who made him were sitting right here at this table, eating pot roast and pretending everything was fine, the way they always had. It took about a week and a half for Brett to put it together. Someone at his firm with access to the communications log told him that the Hartley family office had specifically flagged his name when they pulled out, not the firm, Brett by name. He called me on a Thursday evening and I already knew what was coming. His voice was shaking, not with sadness, but with the kind of anger that comes from being embarrassed and knowing you did it to yourself but refusing to accept that part. "That pretzel guy at your little party," he said, and I could hear him pacing, his shoes hitting a hard floor. "That was Lloyd Hartley, and you let me walk up to him and you didn't say a word?" I leaned back and let the silence sit for just a second. "I told you to lower your voice," I said. "You told me I was too soft." The line went quiet. I could hear him breathing, fast and heavy. Then he hung up. When he called back 2 days later, his voice was smooth, almost professional. That was Brett's gift. He could take any disaster and turn it into a strategy meeting. "You work with Hartley. You can fix this. Set up a meeting. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. I'll shake his hand, buy him dinner, whatever he wants." People get past stuff like this all the time in business. I sat on the edge of my bed. "Brett, you called a man you had never met a guy off the street who looked like he was there for leftovers. That's not a misunderstanding. That's who you are at parties." His voice came back lower, harder. "You owe me this. I'm your brother." I told him I was not going to set up a meeting. I was not going to call Lloyd on his behalf. What happened at that dinner was the result of words that came out of his mouth, not mine. Brett said, "You're making a mistake," and hung up. By Friday afternoon, the whole family knew. Brett had called my parents and told them everything, or at least his version. He told them I had deliberately set him up, put him in a room with one of the most powerful clients my firm worked with, and let him walk into a trap. He told them I was the reason his biggest deal fell apart. Carolyn called me crying. "How could I do this to my own brother?" she said. "He could lose everything." I tried to tell her what Brett had said to Nate at her birthday dinner. I tried to tell her about Polina, the 20 years, the way she had walked away from a family she had loved because Brett made her feel like nothing. I got maybe 2 sentences in before Channing picked up the other line. "You fix this," he said. "Whatever little grudge you're holding onto, you do not let it affect his livelihood. That's family. You do not burn down your brother's career over hurt feelings." I said, "Dad, this isn't about hurt feelings." Brett told Nate he was punching above his weight in front of the whole family. He asked Nate about his extended sabbatical while Nate was spending every day trying to find work. "These aren't hurt feelings. These are real things he did to real people." Channing cut me off the way he always did when the conversation got somewhere he didn't want to go. "Brett is Brett," he said. "You find a way to make this right." I told them I loved them and hung up. My Aunt Virginia called that evening. "What I did was vindictive and petty," she said, and hung up before I could answer. I sat alone in the apartment for a long time. Nate came out of the bedroom and sat down next to me on the couch, close enough that our shoulders were touching, and waited. I stared at the blank TV and said, "They're all calling me the bad guy." Nate was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The cleaning lady who quit after 20 years. Did any of them call Brett the bad guy for that?" I did not answer. We both already knew. The following Wednesday, I was at my desk reviewing a quarterly report when a colleague texted me. "Your brother is in the lobby asking about client events." Brett was standing at the reception desk in the best suit he owned, holding a bottle of wine, smiling at the receptionist with that easy polished charm he could turn on like a light switch. He was there to camp out and wait for Lloyd Hartley to walk through those doors and fix everything with a handshake. I took the stairs and got to him before he talked to anyone else. I grabbed his arm and steered him toward the far wall, away from the desk and away from anyone who might hear us. "What are you doing here?" He smiled, the big one, the charming and reasonable version. "I'm just networking. You won't help me, so I'm helping myself. I figured if Hartley comes through, I can introduce myself properly, clear the air." I told him he was standing in the lobby of my firm trying to ambush one of our biggest clients and this could cost me my job. Brett waved his hand. "You're overreacting. If I fix this, it helps your firm too. Hartley stays happy, your bosses stay happy, everybody wins. You should be thanking me." I stepped away from him and called my mentor Nadine. She came downstairs in 90 seconds, looked at Brett, looked at me, and assessed the whole situation in about 4 seconds flat. She told me quietly to get him into the small conference room and that she would handle the floor. She rerouted a client walkthrough that was supposed to come through the lobby 20 minutes later without anyone noticing. When it was done, she found me outside the conference room door and said, "You have 1 hour to get him out of this building or I'm calling security and I don't care whose brother he is." Her voice was not mean. It was just clear. I went in and closed the door. Brett was already leaning back in a chair with his wine on the table like he was settling in for a negotiation. I stood at the other end and said, "You are going to get me fired. This is my career. This is everything I have worked for. And you walked in here like it's yours to use because you need something." Brett tilted his head and looked at me with the expression I had seen 100 times before, the one where he was deciding whether to be nice or go for the throat. He chose the throat. "You used me first. You invited me to that dinner knowing exactly who was going to be there. You dangled me in front of that guy like bait. You watched me walk up to him and said nothing. So don't act like you're the innocent one because you're not." I opened my mouth to fire back and then stopped because he was not entirely wrong. Every domino that had fallen since that night started with a decision I made on purpose. Both of us were standing in a room built on a choice I had made, and I could not pretend otherwise. "You're right," I said, and the words came out quieter than I expected. "I did set you up." Brett's eyebrows went up slightly. "But I didn't put those words in your mouth. I didn't make you look at a man you had never met and call him a guy off the street who was there for leftovers. That was all you. It's always all you, Brett. Every room you walk into, every person you meet, every dinner, every single time." Brett stared at me, his mouth opened slightly, like he was about to say something, and then it closed. He leaned forward like the words were a second away, and then leaned back. For the first time in my entire life, my brother had absolutely nothing to say. No ranking, no clever line, no way to make himself the winner of the conversation. He picked up the bottle of wine, pushed back from the table, and walked out without looking at me. I heard his shoes on the floor getting quieter, and then the front door opening and closing. 3 days later, Lloyd Hartley came in for a routine portfolio review. When the meeting wrapped up and the rest of the team started gathering their things, Lloyd looked at me and said, "Stay behind for a minute." He told me Brett had figured out which restaurant Lloyd ate lunch at on Thursdays, and had sat down at his table uninvited. He was polished and prepared, Lloyd said. And if Lloyd had never met him before, he might have listened. But then the waiter brought out the wrong dish. And Brett looked at that waiter and said, "This is exactly why some people stay in the service industry." He said it with a smile, like it was a joke Lloyd would appreciate. Lloyd shook his head slowly. He did not know I started as a dishwasher. He did not know my daughter waited tables through college. He did not know anything about me, and he did not care to. He looked at me steady. "I didn't pull out of your brother's deal because of what he said at your party. I pulled out because of who he is, and he just confirmed it for me over a plate of pasta he didn't even let the waiter correct. Your brother has a very small window to become someone different, and he is wasting it trying to become someone impressive instead." Then Lloyd said one more thing. "You invited him to that dinner on purpose. I know that. I knew it that night." I froze. A man who insults strangers that loudly doesn't just show up at a private client event by accident. Someone opened the door for him. He stopped me before I could speak. "I'm not angry, but you gave your brother a stage, and he performed exactly the way you knew he would. That means you know him better than anyone, which means you also know that what he needs isn't a lesson. It's a mirror. And those don't come from traps. They come from people who love him enough to hold one up and not look away." Then he left. I picked up my phone that night and called Brett. He answered with one word. "What?" I said I was not calling to fix his deals or apologize for the dinner. I was calling because Lloyd had told me something, and I thought he needed to hear it. "He said you have a small window to become someone different, and you're wasting it trying to become someone impressive." Brett said nothing for a long time. Then, "That's easy for a billionaire to say." I said, "He started as a dishwasher, Brett. He still lets hostesses seat him in the back of his own restaurant because he doesn't need anyone to know who he is. That's the difference between you and him. He doesn't need the ranking." The line went silent. Brett hung up, but he did not call back with an insult. He did not text. For the first time in his life, Brett had nothing to say. 2 months later, I got a voicemail from Polina. Her voice came through quiet and careful, like she was still deciding whether to tell me this at all. She said Brett had shown up at her house with an envelope, stood on her porch for 10 minutes trying to get words out, and finally told her he was sorry for how he had treated her, and that she deserved better from the family. She said she did not invite him inside, but she accepted the apology. Then she said something I kept replaying for days. He looked like a man who just realized he has been living in a very small room. Brett skipped the next 2 family dinners. When he finally showed up to the third one, he was quieter. He did not comment on anyone's car. He did not ask what anyone did for a living. He sat down across from Nate and said, "How's the job search going?" Nate paused, looked at him carefully, and said, "I just got an offer." Brett nodded and said, "Good, you deserve it." I watched my brother eat in silence for the first time in 34 years.